You know it's going to be a strange day when you wake up to the sound of a saxophone playing Careless Whisper coming from your own paddock. Now, before anyone thinks I'm exaggerating, let me tell you, I live on a farm in rural New South Wales, surrounded by land, chickens, and a freedom that only someone who has escaped a strata condo can understand. But that freedom was violated, not by a fire, a cyclone, or a mob of drunk galas. No, it was by something much more chaotic. A strata Karen, armed with a wedding plan, zero sense of boundary, and an army of vendors. It all started one random morning when I went to feed the chickens and noticed a combi parked next to the fence. A pink combi, with a logo that read, "Stylish Weddings, make your dream come true with us." I thought maybe they had taken a wrong turn. That happens a lot around here. City GPS never understands that a rural cul-de-sac can end in a lagoon. But no, it wasn't a mistake. It was just the first sign that Karen was about to commit the most audacious social crime in the history of our area, organizing an entire wedding on my property without asking for permission. I know what you're thinking. This can't be true, but I swear on my smelliest work boot that this happened. And if you've had the misfortune of dealing with a strata Karen, you know they have an almost supernatural ability to believe the world revolves around them, especially if that world has a lawn, fairy lights, and a cheese platter. Now, before you think I was negligent or passive, let me explain. This Karen was already known in the area. She lives in some new houses built at the corner of the estate, the one they tried to call an eco-village, but which is basically a village of prefabs with bad Wi-Fi and a residents' association that thinks it holds more power than the local government. The woman has a gift. She can turn any simple situation into a dramatic reality show performance, and this time, the chosen stage was nothing less than my backyard paddock. And it was there, with the chickens peacefully nesting and my goats still sleeping in the shade of the mango tree, that I started putting the pieces of the puzzle together. Someone was setting up an event, and this event was going to happen without my consent. You can imagine what's coming, but trust me, what happened next surpassed any expectations. Because if she thought she could use my land as the backdrop for the Bogan wedding of the century, she hadn't yet met the secret weapon I had in the paddock. But hang on. Before unleashing the goat chaos, you need to understand who this Strata Karen is and why she thought this was a good idea. If you think the name Karen already carries weight on its own, wait until you meet the Australian version with a diploma in complaints and a PhD in meddling. I'm talking about the supreme queen of everyday drama, the Strata Karen, who not only believes she has jurisdiction over the neighborhood, she acts as if she's bought the copyright to the sky, the land, and everything in between. The first time I saw this figure was on a Saturday morning when she knocked on my door with a look of disgust and a clipboard in hand. "Did you know that the noise from your chickens exceeds the decibel limit allowed by the strata between 7 a.m. and 9 a.m.? That's what she said to me. I looked at her face, then at the chicken happily clucking in the background, and replied, "Love, this isn't a condo in Sydney. This is a farm, and the chickens don't have a social contract." But that kind of logic doesn't work with a Karen. Not when she's involved in all the residents' association meetings, has secret Facebook groups where she reports badly painted fences and leaves anonymous notes complaining about noisy ute cars passing near her street. The Karen is the type of person who thinks every corner of the world needs to fit the standard of a department store catalog. She planted fake lavender in front of her house, put those plastic pink flamingos in the garden, and installed a sign saying "Vibes Only" on the fence. The same fence she constantly claims is misaligned with the aesthetic of the neighborhood. She has 2 tiny dogs that bark as if they're at war with their own existence, and walks around with a bottle of white wine hidden in a coffee thermos. She wears leopard print leggings, shiny white sneakers, and a cap with the words "Wine Not" embroidered. Whenever something doesn't go her way, she lets out an "This is unacceptable" in a tone that sounds like she's about to call Today Tonight to make an exclusive report. But what really elevates this Karen to another level is the unwavering confidence with which she invades spaces that aren't hers. Like when she organized a community Pilates class in the public school playground without telling anyone. Just showed up with a speaker, mats, and a friend who claimed to be a certified instructor, but clearly struggled to even touch his knees to the ground. And of course, she suggested we should install cameras at every entrance to the street to protect the neighborhood from strange elements. Elements she defines as anyone wearing a tank top or listening to AC/DC at full volume. In other words, basically half the local population. What fascinates me is how she manages to balance this authoritative personality with a touch of lifestyle influencer. She's always posting stories with heavy filters, showing off her organic breakfasts bought at the corner supermarket, and giving tips on home organization that involve buying 40 identical glass jars. Now imagine this woman with her mindset, inflated self-esteem, and that energy of an unelected leader of the universe, deciding that her rural property would be the ideal setting for her daughter's wedding. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. It was premeditated. She had been probing the ground for months. Once she casually mentioned, "This view from your field would make a great spot for ceremonies, you know? So rustic chic." I laughed at the time. I thought it was just another one of her absurd ideas. Little did I know she was plotting the wedding caper months in advance. And while I was still trying to understand how a human being reaches that level of audacity, the suppliers were already starting to set up tents, chairs, and even a dance floor, all beside my chicken coop. But the real cherry on top was yet to come. The increasingly obvious signs that Karen wasn't just decorating a field. She was about to invade, transform, and celebrate without asking for permission. You know that saying, where there's smoke, there's fire? Well, where there's a Karen, there's an unauthorized plan being discreetly executed under the pretense of being just a small, intimate event. After weeks of being bombarded with subtle hints, like when she asked me if my goats knew how to behave around guests, I was already suspicious. But it was only at the beginning of that fateful week that the signs started to become glaringly obvious. On Monday, a sound truck passed by. That's right, a sound truck playing Ed Sheeran's Perfect 3 times in a row, as if it were part of a technical rehearsal. I thought, okay, maybe it's just a coincidence. After all, bad music at high volume is part of modern rural life. But on Tuesday, the suppliers began to arrive. First came the florists, 2 young hipsters from Sydney, with their trousers rolled up to their calves, carrying pots of succulents and sunflowers with more enthusiasm than should be legally allowed. They asked me if they could use the shed's power outlet to hook up the ceremony lighting. Ceremony? I then asked, "What ceremony?" The response was a nervous little smile and, "Oh, didn't Karen tell you?" No, she didn't. What Karen had told me 2 days earlier was that her daughter's cousin was going to have a family gathering in the field. Just a charming picnic, a small thing. In fact, she even had the audacity to offer me a vegetarian quiche in exchange for clearing the space for an afternoon. On Wednesday, the dance floor started to be set up. A wooden stage was erected in the middle of the eucalyptus clearing, the one I usually use for stacking hay and bathing the goats. Nothing says romance like the smell of dry stockyard mixed with eucalyptus, right? On Thursday, the catering arrived, and this is where I began to lose my composure. It was a refrigerated truck, the kind you only see at posh weddings. The crew unloaded boxes of smoked salmon, French brie, artisan bread, and imported mineral water from New Zealand. I repeat, water from New Zealand, being served less than 100 meters from a water trough fed by my own spring. And then they even asked me for ice. Ice, as if I were the rural 7-Eleven. The last straw was when, on Friday, 2 blokes showed up uniformed with the logo of a private security company. "We're here to control guest access and ensure everything goes according to plan," one of them said in a robotic voice. That was it. I asked directly, "Are you saying there's a wedding happening here? On my farm?" The security guard looked at me as if I were the intruder. The space was rented by Ms. Karen. I swear on everything sacred, if I had taken a sip of milk at that moment, I would have spat it straight in his face from laughing so hard. Rented? I had never signed any contract. Karen simply decided that my pasture was the new wedding venue of the season, and acted as if a simple "it's all good" from her was equivalent to a legal agreement. Then you might ask me, but what about the neighbors? Didn't anyone say anything? Of course they did. There was even one who stopped me at the local shop to say, "Mate, I heard there's going to be a wedding on your land. Need any help with the setup?" Apparently, Karen had been telling everyone that we were organizing it together. "Collaborative project with the local farmer," her words. And while all this was happening, she kept showing up at my gate as if nothing was out of the ordinary. "Hi, darling. Just came to check the chair arrangement." Do you think the sunset looks better from the north angle or the southwest? Seriously, if it were a theater production, I would have applauded. But there, in the real world, the woman was setting up an entire wedding on someone else's territory, with the same ease as someone laying a towel on the beach. And of course, like any good Karen worth her salt, she kept everything under the facade of, it's just a family gathering. But with every truck that arrived, with every marquee that was put up, the truth became undeniable. She was orchestrating an event of epic proportions, on private property, without permission, and with the confidence of someone who thinks life is an episode of Home and Away directed by herself. But fine, I let it roll. I made a point of observing every detail of the setup, because if there's one thing the countryside teaches, it's that the best revenge isn't a shout. It's the silence of the farmer who knows there are hungry goats and a sense of justice in his back pocket. And so we approached the big day. Because Saturday was coming, bringing with it the most clandestine wedding in rural Australia. Saturday. The day dawned with that suspicious silence that precedes chaos. The kind of calm that only exists when everyone is already committed to the lie, and now all that's left is the spectacle. I woke up before the sun, as I always do, and went straight to the shed. Not to work. I just went to watch, because the stage was already set. The curtains were up, and the actors were ready. All that was left was for the audience to settle in. By 7 a.m., there was already a group of women in long dresses, made up to the nines, trying to walk in heels on the dirt of my backyard. One of them tripped over a tree stump and fell right into a pile of dry manure. Internally laughing has never felt so therapeutic. At 8 a.m., the sound checks began. Someone, somewhere, decided that the best soundtrack for that moment was Ed Sheeran's Thinking Out Loud. Again. Apparently, Ed's discography had been elevated to the status of the national anthem for illegal weddings organized by Bogans. The microphones were popping, the speakers were crackling, and the power was indeed coming from my socket. A socket I never authorized, but which had been kindly tapped, with an extension cord that ran under the fence, as if it were camping and not an invasion. At 9:30 a.m., the bride arrived, or rather, Karen's daughter, a 22-year-old with a look that suggested she spent more time choosing her Instagram filter than picking out the ring. She got out of a white ute decorated with metallic balloons and a banner reading Bride Vibes in gold letters. She wore a mermaid-style white dress, so sparkly it looked sponsored by a costume shop. Bleached hair, styled in waves, and a bouquet that mixed natural and artificial flowers, the half-alive, half-plastic aesthetic of the family. It was at that moment I understood. It was real. They were actually doing it. A complete wedding with ceremony, guests, food, decorations, photographer, videographer, balloons, DJ, and a drone. Yes, a drone hovering over my field, filming everything as if we were in a Netflix documentary called Illegal Wedding, the Strata Saga. At 10 a.m. in came Karen. And then, my friend, it was like watching a leading actress step onto a stage. She walked in as if there were artificial wind blowing her dress, hair pulled into a high bun, salon makeup, and a microphone attached to her outfit, as if she were the official presenter of the ceremony. She wasn't just the bride's mother. She was the celebrant, the event planner, the organizer, the public relations officer, and the master of ceremonies, all at once. Good morning, everyone. It's an immense pleasure to welcome you to this wonderful rustic chic setting, she began, in that reality show host tone. A charming place that represents our family's connection to nature. Connection to nature? I wanted to grab one of the chickens and put it in her lap to see if that connection could withstand the smell of the countryside. While she was speaking, the guests' children were running between the rows of chairs, kicking bits of tree bark as if they were footballs. An elderly gentleman, clearly intoxicated, leaned against my fence and asked, "Are you the owner of the rural spa? This place is beautiful, mate. Top-notch, rural spa." I didn't even have time to respond, because at that moment, the ceremony began. Karen took the microphone and assumed the role of celebrant. "We are gathered here to celebrate the love between my wonderful daughter, Taylor, and her future husband, Braden. Yes, Braden, with a Y in the middle, because of course it is. In this magical place that represents the beginning of a new cycle." As she read the vows, her eyes glistening with emotion and insincerity, I watched from my house's porch. I sipped black coffee while seeing in the background one of my goats trying to scale the structure of the tent decorated with tulle and Christmas lights. The buffet was set up on long tables, adorned with sprigs of rosemary and jars of scented salts. They had even put up handwritten signs with the names of the dishes: couscous veggie supreme, grass chicken sauté, and country delights, lactose-free. I looked at all of it and thought, how many meetings did this woman have without me knowing? How many times did she step onto my property, take measurements, plan angles for sunset photos, without ever asking if she could? There were toasts, there were speeches, there was even that moment when the DJ announced the couple's first kiss, with a countdown and a cheesy song playing in the background. And all of this in my pasture. To those who were there, it was just another creative and trendy wedding in the countryside. But I knew the truth. This wasn't rural charm. This was an organized invasion with premium catering. And then, as the guests approached the buffet, as the smiles were forced for the camera and Karen threw rose petals as if she were the fairy godmother of chaos, I stood up, took a final sip of my coffee, and looked towards the pen. It was time to act. Because if she thought she could play the star of the day, I was about to introduce the supporting cast she didn't count on. My hungry, uninhibited, and absolutely unstoppable goats. As Karen tossed petals in the air like she was in a spring parade at Bunnings, and the guests lined up for selfies in front of a sign reading, "Live, Laugh, Love," made of MDF, I prepared to unleash the most powerful weapon an Australian farmer has at their disposal: their goats. Not just any goats, of course. These were raised in the countryside, fed on market scraps, and experts at turning any environment into a spectacle of rustic destruction. 12 strong-willed ladies, led by Sheila, the matriarch of the group, an albino goat with twisted horns and the soul of a juvenile delinquent. Sheila had already jumped fences, taken down solar panels, and chewed on a counselor's hat during a rural visit. I hadn't raised a goat. I had raised a legend. I walked calmly to the pen, as if I were inspecting a fence or checking the mineral salt. The goats looked at me with that expression only they have, a mix of boredom, disdain, and hunger. I picked up a bucket with leftover carrot scraps, apple pieces, and lettuce leaves from the day before. I shook the bucket. Sheila stepped forward. She knew. She always knows. The plan was simple. The main wedding tent was set up about 50 meters from the side entrance of the pen. A small wooden gate marked the division between the field and the event area. Normally locked, of course, but that day, it was strategically ajar. Sheila was the first to go through. Then came Rosina, Wellington, Little Doe, and the rest of the crew, a parade of hooves, tails, and restless eyes, advancing in formation as if they were members of a tactical unit trained in buffet sabotage. They crossed the field calmly at first. Some children found it amusing. "Look, Mum, baby goats," said a little girl, a smile on her lips and a piece of bread in her hand. Little did she know that the bread would be the first to fall. The goats arrived at the buffet like they had discovered a new culinary paradise. Sheila jumped straight onto the central table, knocking over a tower of profiteroles. Rosina shoved her snout into a bowl of truffle hummus and started making a mess with an almost spiritual joy. Little Doe snatched a platter of quinoa salad and ran in circles with leaves dangling from her teeth. The scene was a total collapse of civility. Guests were screaming. An uncle of the groom tried to shoo Wellington away with a linen napkin, and was duly ignored. A DJ stumbled while trying to protect his speaker, as Sheila climbed onto the platform and licked the microphone as if she were doing goat karaoke. And the cake. Oh, the cake. A three-tiered spectacle, covered in white frosting and edible flowers, proudly assembled by a baker who was now crying on her knees in the corner of the tent. Sheila scaled that cake like it was Mount Kosciuszko. At the top, she urinated. Just like that. A symbolic act. A historic landmark. The final signature on the revenge contract. Karen's reaction was exactly what you'd expect. Screaming, sobbing, disconnected phrases. "This is an attack! This is sabotage! I'm calling Strata!" she shouted, spinning in circles with her hands on her head, as if she expected some helicopter from the condo management to appear and rescue her. She tried to grab the microphone to restore order, but Sheila was on guard, and Sheila does not forgive trespassers. Meanwhile, I watched everything from the porch, with a glass of iced tea and a quiet pleasure. The neighbor next door also appeared. He chuckled. He muttered a "serves her right" under his breath, with that satisfaction of someone who has always hated Karen, but never had the courage to say it out loud. The wedding videographer, poor guy, tried to keep filming until one of the goats, probably Carmen, head-butted the lens. The final shot? A shaky recording of goats in slow motion, attacking the salad, with a remix of Ed Sheeran in the background. And it's important to highlight, no goats were harmed. In fact, they all left well-fed, with boosted self-esteem and a sense of duty accomplished. When the chaos settled and the guests began to leave, some on foot, others swearing never to attend an outdoor wedding again, Karen came up to me. Yes, she had the audacity. "You had no right to do that," she said, with red eyes and smeared makeup. I simply pointed to the fence. "Neither did you." She huffed, turned on her high heels that were now buried in the mud, and walked away muttering something about lawsuit and emotional damages. I doubt she followed through with it. Maybe she lodged a formal complaint with the Strata Association. Perhaps she wrote a letter, or recorded a dramatic story saying that Australia has lost its values of decency. But there, in that moment, she lost more than a wedding. She lost control. And me? I got my property back. With a bonus, an absurd, glorious, and 100% true story to tell. But the story isn't over yet, because like any good organized chaos, the consequences of the next day were almost as good as the spectacle itself. Sunday arrived with the smell of trampled grass, squashed frosting, and resentment in the air. The farm was covered in traces of a celebration that had started as a Bogan fairy tale and ended like a Cirque du Soleil performance with goats. As the sun rose, illuminating disposable forks, dirty napkins, and what appeared to be a bra tossed over the fence, I had my breakfast in silence. It was a moment of contemplation, the kind of peace that only exists after a successful riot. But it didn't last long. At 9:07 a.m., I received the first notification on my phone, a message in the neighborhood group, that infamous Strata WhatsApp group, led by Karen, since the time she decided that the neighborhood needed more organization and less rural improvisation. Her message began like this: "Good morning, everyone. I would like to report a serious incident that occurred yesterday." I kept reading. It was a testament. 3 paragraphs about unacceptable conduct, out-of-control animals, emotional trauma, and possible legal action. At some point she even suggested that the goats had been trained to attack deliberately. According to Karen, I had premeditated everything as personal retaliation for previous disagreements over rural noise. The woman was treating the case as if it were part of a 60 Minutes dossier. The reactions in the group were lukewarm. Some sympathetic Karens sent sad emojis. Others tried to change the subject by asking who was going to the school craft fair. But the best part was Mick's response, the local plumber. "Karen, you trespassed on the guy's property. He let the goats live there." I thought it was poetic, to be honest. 20 minutes later, Karen left the group, not before writing, "I'm going to look for more serious channels to deal with this." It was almost as satisfying as watching Sheila knock over the cake. The saga, however, spread quickly. One of the teenagers at the party posted a video on TikTok titled, "The Most Insane Rural Wedding in History." Quick editing, trap music, dramatic zooms on Sheila urinating on top of the cake. The video hit 50,000 views in just a few hours. And the comments? A masterclass in Australian internet. The goats are the real heroine. Now that's real grassroots entertainment. Karen was owned. Even the town's little newsletter, the one that only covers pie competitions and the school cricket championships, called me wanting an interview. I declined. Not out of humility, but because I thought it more dignified to let the story live on as an oral legend of the countryside. In the following days, Karen kept her distance. She started wearing sunglasses even on cloudy days, as if trying to escape imaginary paparazzi. She told the neighbors she was suffering from nervous exhaustion, as if she'd undergone an emotional breakdown brought on by forces of nature. And, technically, that was exactly it. Forces of nature, with 4 legs. Her daughter Taylor also posted a lengthy message on Instagram. It spoke of deep disappointment, violation of a sacred moment, and ended with a classic, 2025 can just end now. She included a selfie crying in front of an empty field, captioned, "When love turns to chaos." She received a flood of comments like, "Stay strong, girl," and "The goats are demons." But the most beautiful part of this whole story was the silent support of the real community. Not from the Strata, of course, They live in a parallel universe of delusions and spreadsheets, but from the true neighborhood. The folks who share a fence with me. Mick brought me a box of beer. Marge, from next door, left a note with a package of biscuits. You did what we all wanted to do one day. And me? I got on with my life. The fence was repaired, the field cleaned up, and the goats got an extra day off and a new block of mineral salt as a gift. Sheila, in particular, now walks with an air of superiority that borders on divine. And she deserves it, because there, that chaotic weekend, in a forgotten corner of rural Australia, a goat and a Karen collided, and nature won. After a clandestine wedding, a coordinated goat invasion, and an explosion of hypocrisy seasoned with quinoa and New Zealand water, there's that inevitable question. What do we learn from all this? Well, to start, the first lesson is simple. Karen never comes alone. She comes with a plan, a clipboard, a sentimental Ed Sheeran playlist, and the absolute certainty that someone else's property is, in fact, an extension of her good taste. She doesn't ask, she asserts, doesn't inquire, declares. And the scariest part, she truly believes she's doing a favor. The second lesson is that, when in doubt between calling the police or letting the goats loose, always choose the goats. They are fast, unpredictable, and don't respond to subpoenas. There is no effective defense against a troop of uncontrolled herbivores hungry for bray and territorial justice. No Strata clause, no TikTok lawyer, no improvised celebrant can withstand the power of a determined goat with access to a gourmet buffet. But perhaps the deepest lesson, and I'm using deep with all the irony possible, is about boundary, because when you live in the countryside, surrounded by space, trees, and that feeling of freedom that the big city has long forgotten, you learn to respect others' space. It's an unwritten rule, like not opening a fence without notifying, or not using the neighbor's paddock to do yoga with a goat without prior consent. Karen, of course, didn't receive that memo. She brought with her the mentality of, I was told it's nice here, so it's mine. The mindset of someone who turns any green corner into a backdrop for a selfie, without considering it might have an owner, a history, a purpose, or a goat matriarch ready to urinate on top of a 3-tier cake. And don't get me wrong, I'm not against weddings, nor against parties, nor against rustic chic decor or garden flamingos. Let everyone live their aesthetic and drama as they please. But the key, my dear viewer, is to ask for permission first. 3 simple words. 3 words that prevent viral videos, public embarrassments, and permanent urine stains on vanilla cake. In the end, what remained for me was a clean field, a surreal story, and a newfound respect for the goats I raised. By the way, I'm considering officially training them for rural security service. Custom goat security, protect your property in style and horns. Sounds promising. And for you, who followed this saga to the end, comment if you've ever dealt with a Karen. It could be from Strata, school, the street, or life. Tell me what she did, and of course, how you wish Sheila had dealt with her. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share this story with that friend who thinks country people are all zen and peace and love. Spoiler, we are to a certain extent. After that, we let the goats loose. Until the next video. And remember, the countryside doesn't forgive invaders, especially when cheese is involved.